What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I am back with yet another collection update, trying to get through the remaining stuff that I haven't covered before we get down to year-end lists. And yeah, I got another batch of new stuff here, including this new shirt here sent to me by the Just Joshing. The Morticide album got here before the shirt did, so, I chose to wear it in this one, but thank you once again for this. And, well, in this one, we have some new releases that we didn't get a chance to go over. Got some reissues and even some stuff from the Metalhead box. And much like this shirt, I got another thing sent to me by a fan, a fellow YouTuber as well. So yeah, lots of stuff to go over here, so let's just get down to it. Vanik IV. This is the 6th album from this two-man Cleveland-based speed / thrash / black metal act. This is one I got in the Metalhead box, which is interesting because the last time I got a Vanik album was in the Metalhead box as well. I got their album 3, which would make that the 5th album. I really enjoyed that album, and I also found out that Vanik, the person on here, is actually the guitarist that plays live in Midnight. So it's kind of cool to see those bands connected, and they're kind of connected by the sound. Like, this is very similar to Midnight, though I would say there's more thrash and speed metal to it, whereas like Midnight definitely goes for like a lot of Venom and just like a lot of like classic heavy metal riffs mixed with that just sleazy, crusty black metal energy. This band definitely goes for more like old school thrash, like very early Bay Area. Like, there's lots of like Kill 'Em All, and I would even say like Slayer, Show No Mercy too. A lot of this is about, D beats, rapid fire riffs, songs like Chamber of Horrors, No One Else, Dead End, all just kind of thrive on just like kind of like moshy, thrashy energy. Vocally, I think it's kind of interesting because I think on the third one he was a little bit closer to that Midnight style where it's just, kind of a straightforward kind of growl. It's, still very dramatic. I love Midnight. Here, though, it kind of varies from song to song. Like, sometimes you'll get like more of just a straightforward, thrashy, kind of like black and thrash delivery. And then on others, he's a little bit more tuneful. Like, honestly, there's some vocals on here that kind of reminded me a little bit of James Hetfield. Devoured Melody in particular almost sounds like an old school Metallica cut, albeit with like a more evil sort of like vibe to it overall. You get some more punky cuts every now and then, like Infernal Infection and Trapped. Infernal Infection has some like really fun, dramatic vocals. I kind of like the over-the-top delivery on them. Though I will say, like, in terms of the mix of the album, the vocals feel kind of like inconsistently mixed. Like, sometimes they just don't sound right. Like, the mix is a little bit odd. Like, maybe their placement in the song in terms of like being out front or out back, or just like a weird distortion on them. Sometimes that weird distortion kind of works, but sometimes it was just, a little bit off. I went back and compared this to 3, and honestly, I kind of like 3 a little bit more. It's a little bit more just like straightforward, kind of just blackened thrash, blackened speed metal. This one, well, it's got like a little bit more variety, like Darkness and Deceit's, notably a more groovy, more sinister, slow number. I just kind of like the mix and just the overall vibe of the first one. Like, this is still really fun. It's really riffy. If you're a big fan of Hellripper, Toxic Holocaust, Midnight for sure, you're probably still gonna really dig this. I'd say definitely check it out if you just like old school, like just ripping black and thrash and speed metal. It's a pretty no frills listen, but who the hell gives a shit about frills when it comes down to this stuff? So yeah, check it out. VHS, Halloween Treats, Demos, Splits, and Ghoulish Delights. This is a compilation from this Canadian, I would guess say like death grind act. I've been meaning to get into this band for a while, like just like check out some of their stuff. I don't know if this was like the best launching point because this is like a long comp. It is 34 tracks and 71 minutes, and it's all just horror worshipping and humor worshipping death grind. Now, that's not a problem at all. I love that shit. Like, give me stuff like that all the time. Like, that's kind of why I'm a big Exhumed fan. And there's a lot of comparisons to draw here. But with compilations, you do get kind of like that inconsistent mix because, again, they're pulling from like multiple sources, and, sometimes they sound a little bit more demo-ish, sometimes they sound a little bit more polished. And that's kind of the case on here. But what is consistent across the board is fun and, of course, just great horror movie samples. One of my personal favorites is When Sleeping Bag Meets Tree. It's definitely a Friday the 13th reference, but it's that hologram scene in Jason X where he just kills the 2 hot chicks and like is beating one against the tree in the sleeping bag. It's literally the only good scene in that piece of shit movie. I absolutely hate Jason X. But there's tons of samples peppered all over here, and then these songs just kick off into like very thrashy death grind. Like lots of thrash riffs. Like a good chunk of this is just kind of driven by just gnarly, almost kind of like crossover riffs. Like this is almost kind of similar to like Birdflesh in a way, where you get a lot of crossover thrash mixed in, but also comparable to Birdflesh because they like to squeak in other styles too. Like occasionally you hear some black metal tremolos. Occasionally you get some like fun heavy metal licks like on Hairspray and Bloodspray and the Killer Waves 2 theme. Like they're kind of like throwbacks to like just sleazy 80s heavy metal and, you know, just fun, catchy riffs, but again with like a little bit of a grittier veneer on them. You even get like some fun punky tracks. I mean, all the songs are short anyway, and, you know, grind's definitely got its roots in punk. I don't know, this is just kind of a fun release. And again, I don't know if it's like the right launching point in terms of like getting into this band. Like I wouldn't recommend this first. I would probably recommend like checking out a full length. I mean, if they have full lengths. I really didn't check out their archives that much. Clearly they have a lot of EPs and splits because there's a lot of material on here. But yeah, if you're a big fan of like Birdflesh, definitely Exhumed. Exhumed is probably the big one that stands out here. Check this out. This is just a lot of just gory, ridiculous fun, and it's pretty damn hilarious too. So yeah, I think I'm going to have to find some full lengths by this band. Hi Parasite, Forever We Burn. This is the debut full length from this UK goth metal project. This features Aaron Stainthorpe of My Dying Bride, and this might have been one of the reasons why My Dying Bride didn't play MDF this year, because I believe he was working on this project. And, well, I mean, one of the themes of this year has definitely been more like goth rock-centric metal releases here lately. And here's one more to check out. Though, in terms of like all the other ones I've listened to and got into, like Unto Others, Cemetery Skyline, The New Tribulation, I'm not as big of a fan of this one. This one doesn't feel like as rooted in like that kind of like classic Sisters of Mercy sort of sound. This feels more like, I don't know, like Lacuna Coil-ish. Like this is almost like industrial / groove metal, like lots of heavy syncopated riffs and, you know, dreary atmosphere. There's some industrial flex on here. So like honestly, like less 80s and more like 90s, I guess you could say. Honestly, this feels very comparable to My Dying Bride's like Gods of the Sun. Like it kind of feels like that era of the band, albeit with like a different moniker on it. You get a good balance of harsh and clean vocals on here, which honestly, like harsh vocals haven't been like the biggest thing when it came down to like a lot of these like goth rock throwback albums. And Aaron, to his credit, does them really well, though he kind of hangs on to a mid-register growl, which I don't like as much as his like deep roars. Like, I mean, we already had an awesome My Dying Bride album this year and he sounded great on that. Here, it sounds a little bit more restrained, but my issue is the music itself. The music itself, I feel like is just kind of bland. Like, don't get me wrong, there's some solid songs on here. Wasn't Human, Hate Springs Eternal, Let It Fail. Solid hooks in those, great melodies, really solid, like heavy syncopated riffs and good driving rhythms. But there's a lot of like rinse and repeat on here, and it doesn't quite give me that same nostalgic glow that, again, a lot of these other bands that have been doing this sort of like retro goth sound, you know, I've been really good at. Outside of a few more like up-tempo rockers on here, a lot of it is just very mid-paced, and I don't know, it kind of feels like a bit thrown together. There's not a lot of like dynamic between the songs. Like there's not a tremendous amount that makes them stand out. Like the ones that I named off here were probably the ones that stood out the most, namely because I feel like, you know, the chorus hooks, namely, kind of like soared above the rest of the material on here. The rest of this feels like it's kind of running in place, and you know, I really wanted to like this because, again, this has been like a really cool retro movement that is, I would say, like kind of happened just this year. But this one kind of missed the mark. Still, I mean, if you're a big fan, again, like Tribulation's new one, Cemetery Skyline, Unto Others, and I mean, honestly, again, like a little bit more of like My Dying Bride's like, you know, mid-period, I guess you could say, like, you know, 33.4 or whatever that percentage is complete. And of course, like Gods of the Sun, check it out. I think it's okay, but who knows, you might be an even bigger fan of it. You won't know until you check it out for yourself. Better Lovers, Highly Irresponsible. This is the debut full length from this I mean, I guess you can call it a metalcore supergroup. Features current and former members of bands like Every Time I Die, Fit for an Autopsy, Dillinger Escape Plan. This essentially, I guess, is like the spiritual continuation of Every Time I Die, which essentially just nuked itself from within. I've had dysfunctional breakups that have been less dysfunctional than that band's breakup. Anyway, I'm still a big Every Time I Die fan, so I was really stoked to go over this one. Sadly, we didn't have time to do a full review, and man, I really wish we did, because this album is fucking awesome. This is just absolutely feral and unhinged, but catchier than hell. I absolutely love the just spazzy energy on here. I mean, kind of brings me back to, of course, Every Time I Die, but also bands like Botch, Norma Jean. It's that sort of like twisting, kind of menacing metalcore where you get a lot of those like alarm clock riffs and weird stuttered off-time breakdowns. As much as I love Keith Buckley as a vocalist, I really think Greg is just a perfect fit here. He sounds feral and maniacal, but also managed to generate some really solid, catchy hooks. The opening track in here, Lie Between the Lines, man, it just comes in thundering after this really kind of like more laid back, clean intro. And Greg just screams his guts out, but he also generates these great like melodic hooks on choruses, especially on Future Myopia. That song is just infectiously catchy. That chorus has been living rent-free in my head since I got this. I really like the combination of Will Putney and Jordan Buckley on guitars. Jordan always had this like fun, like, you know, southern rock flair that he would add to a lot of his riffs, you know, with all those like twisting, you know, just gnarly alarm clock breakdowns and, you know, just the stuff that Every Time I Die does really well. And Will, I think, brings like this additional heaviness. Now, he also did the production here, which I'm kind of hit or miss on his production, but honestly on here, it just really works. Like the drums sound fatter than hell. The guitars are just chunkified. There's a lot of good low end to it. Everything just sounds really good in here, so I really can't bitch about it much. I mean, yeah, like the snare kind of does sound like it's an electronic kit, but that's almost kind of like Will Putney's sound. What I really like is the music, like this unhinged energy on here. While there's a lot of like big groovy off-time breakdowns, this album moves faster than hell. Your Misplaced Self, Drowning in a Burning World, Superman Died Paralyzed. It's weird, I've been seeing like Christopher Reeve stuff like everywhere here lately. Anyway, fast, gnarly D beats, lots of crazy turnovers in the rhythms. I love the drum work on here. It's as frantic as the vocals, I would say. That song in particular though, there's like a full-on like death metal stampeding, like heavy machine gun chug and double time section that kind of comes out of nowhere, because a lot of this, you know, it's definitely more like hardcore Jason in terms of the rhythms, but that was like a full-on just like metal part right there. Now there are like some, I guess you could say like softer numbers, or at least more accessible, more driven by like cleaner vocals on here. At All Times and Deliver Us from Life. I like those songs. I think they're okay, but, you know, generally I favor the heavier, more just frantic songs in here. Like that's the energy that I want while driving my car well above the speed limit while listening to this. The album's called Highly Irresponsible. I figured that's the appropriate way to like really kind of get into this album, is to do something that is highly irresponsible. But yeah, I absolutely love this album. This is fucking killer. I really wish we actually went over this one. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw this on my year-end list. I love pretty much every second of this. If you're a big fan of Every Time I Die, Dillinger Escape Plan, Botch, Norma Jean, stuff like that, check this out. This thing is absolutely awesome. Fleshgrind, Demo Days. This is a compilation of, I believe, all the band's demos, as well as like a collection of live tracks from this Chicago-based death metal, brutal death metal act. I have their 3 full lengths, and this was sent to me courtesy of one Metal Viking 82. Once again, thank you very much, man. This actually, I would say, kind of like completes their discography, because I think the only thing I had left was probably like demos. And I believe this band only had the 2 demos before they put out their full length, so yeah, this would cover it. Anyway, this has their 2 early demos, their 1992 demo, Holy PDF File, we're not actually saying that word, and their 1995 demo, Sorrow Breeds Hatred, Bleed For Me. Now, interestingly enough, it starts off with the second demo, but I hadn't heard either, so it really didn't matter. But yeah, this second demo here is raw, nasty. I think this is all remastered, because while this is definitely still like, muddy and gritty and, it sounds like a 90s death metal demo, it definitely sounds like it's been cleaned up a little bit. The riffs are gross and gnarly. The vocals in here have a lot of extra flair to them, like, some extra distortion and pitch correction to make some of the gurgles sound even more gross. They're very over the top, and I mean, so are the song titles. Ejaculate on entrails, come on my stumps. Yeah, no, very romantic. Now the Holy PDF file one, honestly, I kind of like a little bit more. Like, it's a little bit more on the muddy side, but I mean, again, it's like kind of cleaned up on this remaster. But the songs kind of jumped out to me a little bit then, and I really like the more straightforward vocal approach on it. Like, it just sounds like, dudes jamming in a room. Like, there's not a lot of extra effects on them. And there's some just absolutely catchy songs in it, like Anger. Anger in particular, I love that chuggy two-step that comes in on that song. And a fair amount of the songs on there kind of put off like a very like suffocation, human waste vibe. Like, it's just raw, it's brutal. And despite the guitar tone being a little bit muddier, I just think the riffs hit a little bit harder on that demo. And the live tracks honestly are pretty solid. I think this is from like a live EP in like Germany. You can tell it's a small crowd, but it's an energetic crowd. And I don't know, I just kind of dig it overall. Like, there's just a fun vibe to it. They sound good, they're tight, they're engaging the audience. Just good stuff. Yeah, this is pretty awesome. I would say like this is like for the fans only. Like, if you're a big fan of Fleshgrind like throughout their entire career, go ahead and find this. Like, this is kind of like that missing piece of the puzzle. And honestly, the demos are pretty damn solid. If you're a big fan of Suffocation, Broken Hope, Oppressor, maybe like Baphomet too, check this out. Pretty solid stuff. And of course, thank you very much once again, Metal Viking 82, for sending me this. I really appreciate it. Gigan, and forgive me, I'm going to have to read directly off the cover here because there's no way in hell I was going to remember this album title. Anomalous, Abstractigate, Infinitessimus. This is the 5th album from this, well, all right, then Florida, now Chicago-based, technical / progressive / I don't know, maybe brutal death metal act. This band is strange, and I've been into this band since their debut album, Order of the False Eye. I legit got this band just because I knew their band name was a reference to a kaiju. Godzilla-oriented stuff holds that much sway with me. And even back then, this band was strange, and man, once again, this band really kind of has their own sound. It is technical, it is dense with like distant riffs and weird just riff patterns and noises. Like the opening track on here, God, these are all like sentences. Transdimensional crossing of the Alta Tenuous, whatever that is. Just a wall of dissonance that comes in and just absolutely suffocates you. This album is just loaded with riffs that feel like they're kind of like swarming around you like locusts. Lots of sharp transitions, bizarre, like sci-fi, horror-ish, atmosphere. Like, I mean, this feels like it would be like Lovecraftian oriented. I don't know, it might be. There's, again, a lot of stuff to digest in terms of their song titles, like Ultraviolet Shimmer and Permeating Infrasound, Square Wave Subversion, Emerging Sex of Dagonic Acolytes. That could be Lovecraftian. I don't know. I know that this is bizarre and very engaging. Like, this kind of falls in line a little bit with, like, I would say, like, later Gorguts, Ingurgitating Oblivion, maybe even Defeated Sanity, though, like, riff-wise, not like Defeated Sanity. Like, this is way more about distance and atmosphere. Like, in terms of the riff construction here, I could not even tell you what they're doing on here. But I can tell you that occasionally it is very catchy, like Emerging Sex of Dagonic Acolytes. The beginning and the end of that song have like these really cool angular riffs. They actually have like kind of an interesting melody to them. And in terms of like the drum playing here, like this is like a jazz fusion, like clinic, I would say. The drum work in here is amazing, whether they're doing like these crazy blast beats or going into these almost like Sean Reinert-esque sort of grooves. Like, there's a lot of proggy flair to the drum work, and I really kind of latched onto that. But there are points in here where it just becomes like a bit too much. Like the whole middle part of Emerging Sex of, I'm not saying the whole thing again, is this long, drawn-out atmospheric section. The song is a like 10-minute brain melter. Like, this atmosphere just kind of like beats you down and just kind of weirds you out. Like it feels like you're just kind of caught in this like weird spiraling vortex into the awaiting mouth of an ancient Lovecraftian deity or something like that. Couple that with the vocal cadences in here, which don't necessarily follow the very, complicated rhythms on here. They almost have their own rhythm, like a stream of consciousness, and they're just kind of this like steady bark of just insanity. But when it all comes together, it kind of is really interesting, like erratic pulsivity and horror. That song, I kind of like how they like implement like some pick scraping on the strings to, kind of create these interesting rhythms. And then you have like weird elastic kind of like stretchy riffs. It's a lot to digest. And, I will say like in some of the more like just straight up atmospheric, like ambient sections on here, it sounds like someone taking a belt sander to like piano strings while a jazz fusion drummer just kind of does his own thing. But again, when it comes together, it's really interesting. I dig this. It's just, it's a lot to take in. I've listened to this multiple times and I still kind of leave confused. But parts of it start to make more sense the more I listen to it. If you're a big fan of, I feel like Gorguts Obscura is still kind of a template for this, but also Ingurgitating Oblivion. There's definitely a bit of like malignancy on here too. I don't know. Check this out. This is an absolutely wild listen and pretty much par for the course for this band. Like if you like this one, go ahead and check out the rest of their stuff. It's just absolutely nuts. Iotunn Kinship. This is the second album from this Danish progressive metal, progressive death metal maybe on this one. We got a lot of requests to do this one, but when I put it up for a vote, it kind of lost out to, I believe, Black Curse, which I totally understand. That album's absolutely badass. But I was definitely going to cover this one in some facet. I really did want to do a full-on review, just we didn't have time. I was a big fan of their debut, Access All Worlds, and that one, I would say, is kind of different from this one, where this one, it definitely still has all of their proggy flair. This one's a little bit heavier, and actually, I feel like this is where like some of the death metal roots come in. Now this band, I guess you could say, is a supergroup. Like a lot of the members definitely have a lot of other projects. Their frontman also fronts Barren Earth, which I'm a big fan of, and that dude is an absolutely amazing vocalist. And here you can hear a little bit more of that vocal dynamic that he shows in Barren Earth, because this one definitely has more harsh vocals on it, but it's the cleans that steal the show. This guy has these anthemic, huge, clean vocals, and he just absolutely kills it on the choruses. The vocal harmonies in here are beautiful, but now you have like something to kind of play off of them with like some of the harsher sections on here. Earth to Sky, I would say, is probably the heaviest cut I've heard from this band, but this band, I would say like overall most of this is about like grandiosity and building huge songs. The opening and closing tracks on here are both over 10 minutes, and they are chock full of dynamics and great builds, soaring leads, great guitar harmonies. This band's sound is just flat out huge, and when they get down to these epic choruses like Mistland has just this monolithic size like epic hook to it. The chorus absolutely soars on there. Man, like those are the moments that just really caught my ear, and they repeat quite often. There's a good variety in the songs. Like you have like more up-tempo songs like Twilight, which feel like they're galloping into battle. You also have more somber, reflective sections. Again, the vocals are absolutely amazing in here. A lot of this reminds me of the latest album from Borknagar, or actually probably like the last 3 albums from Borknagar. Even Earth to Sky has like just a touch of black metal to it, which definitely gave it a Borknagar sound. I flat out dig this one. This is just quite an epic listen. I don't know if it's going to be a year ender for me. My list, it's getting tough to whittle down. I already have so many albums on there. This year has been absolutely loaded with killer stuff, but if anything, this is an honorable mention if it doesn't make it on there. If you're a big fan of Borknagar specifically, and I would say like Amorphous, Barren Earth, stuff like that, strongly recommend you check this out. This is a killer album, and honestly, I think even better than the debut. So yeah, check it out. Schammasch, the Maldoror Chants, Old Ocean. This is the 5th album from this Swiss avant-garde blackened death metal act. I have been a fan since, was it Sick Lucience Lux, I think is the name of the debut. I really dug that one. Their last one, Hearts of No Light in particular, I think was probably my favorite. A lot more melody, a lot more hooks to it. I will say for an avant-garde band, or at least a band described as avant-garde, this is very listenable, very catchy, and man, these guys are just great songwriters. There's a lot of atmosphere, a lot of building, but it doesn't get like too off-kilter to the point where it becomes just an artistic expression of how weird the band can be. They already wear shrouds and like weird face stuff. They already look weird. They don't necessarily need to like sound weird. A lot of this is very catchy. There's a lot of like post-metal builds to it, like drawing out a part and then building in layers and then huge crescendos. In comparison to the last one, the songs on here are quite a bit longer, like they really do draw out the builds quite a bit. And I will say that this band has like a more like death metal tone, at least to the guitars. Like they're a little bit thicker and meatier. You don't get like a lot of like, you know, gainy, sizzly guitars. You can especially hear that on tracks like Your Waters Are Bitter. Like there's just some like heftier, chuggier riffs to it. And surprisingly, with the amount of clean vocals on here, this kind of draws like some comparisons, I would say, to like bands like Mastodon, Cult of Luna, and at points even Tool. They have found their master in particular has a very Toolish sound to it. Even the production kind of feels like that, you know, warm, rich Joe Barassi production that Tool absolutely loves. The riff construction even has those kind of like crawling Adam Jones riffs with the like, you know, kind of haunting, kind of almost like stonery tags to them. And again, this kind of like splits up the clean vocals and the harsh vocals really well. There's even female cleans on here. This whole album has this like dark, haunting sort of atmosphere to it. And it really makes good use of like the dynamics in terms of like the softer moments to the heavier songs. Like the builds, I think, are really solid on here. It's a little bit more, I don't know, maybe progressive than the last one. Like the last one, I feel like they really went for like solid melodic hooks. And that's not to say that they aren't here, but they're more drawn out. They're more building towards them, trying to get these songs to be as huge and as lavish as possible. And honestly, I kind of prefer that a little bit. Like these guys are really good at pacing these songs to kind of like well up the emotion. The last track in particular, Hail You Old Ocean, I think is quite possibly one of the best songs on the album. One of my favorite songs I think I've heard from this band. The riff that hits the 6-minute mark of that song is absolutely massive. Like it just has like weight to it. It's catchy, but it's heavier than hell. And the song is just flat out epic as hell. It kind of reminds me a lot of Disillusion, which has become one of my favorite progressive metal, progressive death metal acts from Germany here lately. I just like the way the song kind of swells in emotion, and again, these songs being longer, they have room to do so. There's just a ton of dynamics across the board in here. Spoken word, treble drums, female vocals, you know, dropouts, and then building in layers like post-metal. This is really, really good. Another one that I think might be on my cusp in terms of like a year ender, but the more I listen to it, I don't know, it might actually climb into my top 40. If you're a big fan of Cult of Luna and again, Mastodon, I feel like, you know, that avant-garde tag should be kind of dropped off in this one because it does feel a little bit more straightforward. Like this doesn't feel like a weird Psy album or anything like that, but I don't know. I just feel like you should check this out. I think this is just an absolutely killer album overall. And I don't know if you just like your blackened death metal big and epic and catchy and maybe a little bit more on the clean side in terms of the melodies, check this out. This is just an awesome listen. Solitude Aeturnus finally got their first 2 albums in a 2-disc collection here, Into the Depths of Sorrow and Beyond the Crimson Horizon. Been a lot of this band showing up in collection updates here lately, and well, this will complete all of the full lengths now. These are the 2 I've been meaning to get for a while. They are often lauded as their best albums, and man, I don't know, this band's discography is really good, so it's kind of hard for me to say, but both of these albums are absolutely amazing. I've become a huge fan of Robert Lowe's vocals over the years, and hearing him in his early days and when he had like more of a higher register, it's really interesting in comparison to like a lot of the stuff that I've heard that has been a little bit more recent. He's gained more of a gruff tone throughout the course of this band, and the first album, Into the Depths of Sorrow, you can definitely hear more of his clean, almost operatic vocals more. It's, you know, a little bit closer to like Messiah from Candlemass, which this band is very comparable to Candlemass, in case you didn't figure that out. Now, these are both remasters, and they did a solid job. It still retains a lot of that, you know, like kind of old school analog sound, but it just feels more clear and a little bit like, you know, louder and more punchy. And the songwriting on here, and we're still talking about the first album, by the way, so damn good. I love the drum work, which is a weird thing to say in terms of like more doom-oriented stuff, because generally the drum work is more slow, you know, kind of just staying in the pocket, just driving the songs. There's a lot of killer turnovers and transitions in the drum work that I think are just awesome. Comparatively, it's not like very simple drumming. Like there's a lot of cool accents, and again, like these constantly switching rhythms and such. I just absolutely dig it. Destiny Falls to Ruin and White Ship have like classic like heavy metal gallops to them. They're a little bit more up-tempo in sections. But man, the thing that absolutely sells this for me are these giant, woeful choruses. Destiny Falls to Ruin in particular, that one, I don't know, that's a huge standout for me. That one and Mirror of Sorrow, that one probably has like some of my favorite vocals on that album. And it's so dreary, it's so gloomy, but it's so damn catchy. The lead work on here is absolutely fantastic. I think there might even be some lead trades on White Ship in particular, like it kind of has that kind of like back and forth like Iron Maiden sort of trade when it comes down to like the more like up-tempo sections. Yeah, absolutely love the debut. But honestly, Beyond the Crimson Horizon, I think is even better. Robert starts sounding a bit more gruff on that one, and that's kind of the Robert Lowe that I've really been like kind of a fan of. The riffs are heavier, there's more crunch to the guitar, and I just think the riffs in general are just even catchier. Like they just pretty much did, I think, everything they did well on that debut and just kind of did it better. Like they made the songs, you know, twice as gloomy, twice as heavy. The opening track, Seeds of the Desolate, is an immediate banger. Scorching lead work on there, love the riffs, and once again, clever drum work. You know, again, like not a trope I'm really used to in terms of, you know, doom metal. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but often, you know, in terms of doom metal, it's a little bit more laid back in terms of the drum work. Here, it's not. Like there's, again, tons of killer fills and transitions, awesome grooves, great accents. But again, the thing that I love about this one is it's way more oppressive and dark and heavy. The Final Sin, the Hourglass, Beyond, the last track, which is kind of an outro, but dude, they could play that riff forever. It's so damn heavy and gloomy. I absolutely love it. And that's like the tone, the vibe that I've really gotten used to in terms of like getting into a lot of Solitude Aeturnus' later stuff. I love all the melodic flair that's on the first one, but this one has that same melodic flair, but again, it's more oppressive and dark and more theatrical. They just embraced everything spooky they possibly could and threw it on that album. Even threw in some synths in there for some extra atmosphere. There's even a thrashy section on It Came Upon One Night that kind of comes out of nowhere and just absolutely owns. Like you get these like more, you know, chunky, like kind of like thrash metal riffs that pop up. Killer lead work, once again, like I love all the lead work on both of these. Yeah, this is absolutely awesome. And I know like trying to find originals of either one of these is pretty damn difficult. So if you're looking for like just those first two albums, you don't care about getting OG copies, strongly recommend this set. Great remasters too. Everything sounds clear and crunchy. Yeah, both these albums absolutely rule, and yeah, I finally completed Solitude Aeturnus. It wasn't the longest discography, and there's some EPs in between there that I might snag, but in terms of the full lengths, I got them all now, and man, I don't know. Beyond the Crimson Horizon might be my favorite out of all of them. It's hard to say. I like a lot of this band's work, but yeah, if you've never heard this band, if you're a big fan of Candlemass, Crypt Sermon 2 in particular, I feel like Crypt Sermon gets a lot of their sound, you know, probably from this band. Check this out. Absolutely killer. Both of them. Yeah, this band rules. Transport League. We Are Satan's People. This is the 10th album from the Swedish sludge, doom, alt, kind of new metal act. They were kind of a blend of all these things. I got into this band way back in the 90s with their album Super Evil. I picked it up in a used bin. I liked it. It was sludgy. It was weird. The vocals were, I don't know, kind of hard to describe. Like part of it kind of occasionally sounded like, you know, like alt rock yarling, but after I discovered Static X, I was like, man, these two really sound similar. And his vocals haven't changed one bit. But I saw this and was like, hey, you know what? I haven't checked out this band in a while. Let's revisit. Let's see what they're all about. I still like their earlier albums, Super Evil. I got Satanic Panic too, which I thought was really solid as well. More like just heavy, sludgy groove metal. And this is kind of that, though not terribly interesting. A lot of these songs are just kind of straightforward riff rockers, like find a riff, dry hump it, stay in that kind of like same 4/4 time groove. Like there's not a lot of variety between the songs. And there's maybe like a little bit of that nu metal carryover, I would say, like songs like Unkill Crash. I don't even know what that means. Primate Ape Shit. Yeah, okay, whatever. Those weird electronic drums you'd hear at like the beginning of like a ton of different nu metal songs. Baseline, this kind of feels like a groove metal version of like Static X. Like it doesn't have all the electronic elements, but it has that, I don't know, like mid-90s sound where, it's groove metal, but it feels like it's transitioning a bit into like that nu metal sound, like especially with their guitar tone. There's like weird extra stuff they kind of throw in, like I want to say the opening track, Possessed, has like a cheerleader break. It's odd. I don't know if it really necessarily fits. It might fit a bit better than the end of Grind You Down, which has the chorus refrain from BC Boys Sabotage for literally no reason. Like it wasn't even alluded to. They just threw it in there because like, hey, we like BC Boys. A lot of the songs just kind of are like mid-tempo to up-tempo, just rockers. There's some decent songs on here though. I like Danger of Death. That one kind of feels like a scissor fight song a little bit. And every now and then you get like these like really good, like kind of like stoner doom riffs that pop up that are kind of fun. But for the most part, this was just kind of a there listen. Like it's just, very straightforward groove metal, again, kind of nu metal-ish. Like, this is like listening to like a Godsmack album, though I would say like this is more fun than listening to a Godsmack album. I don't think people listen to Godsmack for fun anyway. I think, most of their fans probably listen to it because they got that sun tattooed on them someplace and they kind of have to like justify it by at least listening to them once a year. So yeah, it's better than that, but honestly, it's just, again, kind of there. If you're a big fan of, stuff along that lines, but also like, some stoner rock stuff, like there's some Caius-ish moments on it that are kind of fun. Check it out. It's okay. I mean, it's not really my thing. I do like their older albums a bit more. I would recommend those over this, but check it out. Who knows? You might like it. Hirax. Not Dead Yet. This is a reissue of their 1987 compilation, which contains their first two albums, Raging Violence and Hate, Fear, and Power. Now, I've been meaning to get some older Hirax for years. I have some of their more recent-ish albums. And this band, I think, is like kind of important in terms of like the history of crossover thrash, like especially their earlier work. They were probably among one of the earliest crossover acts, along with like DRI and SOD. And honestly, I think one of the first bands ever throwing blast beats in a song. I think SOD might have beat them to the punch by just a little bit, but their first album also came out in 1985 as well. Either way, I've always thought this band was really interesting, especially when it came down to the dynamic between the music and the vocals. Iotunn's vocals have always been more clean. Like, he's more of a singer than he is a screamer, though he is, adequate at both. But he likes a lot of, like, heavy 80s metal wailing, like, more along the lines of, like, speed metal and classic heavy metal. But the music itself, hard-hitting, fast, lots of thrashy, punky riffs. Like, it's straight up crossover. But instead of like a Billy Milano, you have like a Joey Belladonna on top, which I think is kind of cool. The songs are short, explosive, very comparable to like a band like Excel, which I would say is like kind of a contemporary of theirs, even though I think they came out like maybe much later. If I'm not mistaken, they came out in like the 90s or like the very early 90s or late 80s. Either way, pretty comparable. Also kind of comparable to Holy Terror too, especially in terms of the vocals, though, not so much musically, at least in terms of like the brevity of the songs and just how outright just violent they are. The hefty chugging grooves that show up on Bombs of Death and Destruction and Terror in particular, I just absolutely love those because you don't get a lot of moments where they settle down. In fact, the blast beat thing kind of pops up on here quite a bit. And they're definitely like very primal blast. Like they're not like, stuff you would hear in like a Nile album or anything like that. but it's definitely like the groundbreaking ceremony for blast beats, I would say, in, you know, extreme metal. But I like that primal energy. It works with the music, like songs like Raging Violence. Song sounds like it's about to lose its shit at any moment, but it manages to kind of like keep it together for the song. Now, Hate, Fear, and Power, I had never actually heard any tracks from. I had heard tracks from Raging Violence before, but that one I just kind of completely overlooked. And well, it's kind of interesting that their follow-up full length was only like 16 minutes long. Like, it's even shorter and more violent than the debut. Every song on it is fast as hell. I feel like there's just added aggression. Even Iotunn sounds a little bit more gruff at times on that one. And yeah, no, it's pretty badass as well. More of an EP than a full length, but yeah, no, it's just a vicious, explosive album. And I would say like it doesn't really expand their sound like musically much. It definitely expands the amount of rage they could condense into like a 16-minute album or EP. I mean, technically it's an album, I guess. I don't know, whatever. Yeah, overall, this was a fun listen. It's kind of like a fun window into time in terms of like the birth of crossover. It's raw, primal roots. Like, this is like kind of the caveman equivalent of crossover in a way. Like, we're still trying to figure this out, but we got the energy. We're pretty sure we got the riffs. Let's just kind of go for it. And I like that about this. If you're a big fan of SOD, MOD, DRI, other bands that probably have acronyms too, check this out. Pretty solid stuff. Cannon and Fiber for victory and regularity. Just kidding, it's something way more German than that. Die Katastrophe. This is the second album from this one-man German melodic death metal / black metal act. I know a lot of people were going nuts for this one in the comments. They definitely wanted us to do a review of it. We just couldn't get around to it because, again, everything else came out. But the massive amount of hype around this, I was very curious, and I finally got my copy. And honestly, I think, you know, a good chunk of the hype is well-deserved. This kind of runs like a World War I themed dissection album. Like, lots of like huge melodies. It's very epic. It's very dark. I really like that it has this interesting World War I theme to it. Like, even the frontman, who I believe goes by Noise, who I believe is the main guy behind all this, and then the rest of the guys are, you know, kind of his like nameless ghouls, like Ghost. He even sports the kind of like Kaiser pointed helmet thing, which I don't know, I've always just thought that was just an interesting helmet. But musically, this is very grand, very epic, but also just dark and heavy. Love the vocals on it. I don't love the fact that every track here is in German, and, you know, I struggle at foreign languages, but yeah, you know, that's kind of commonplace here. But in terms of like how huge the atmosphere is and how big their sound is and how well they integrate their themes into the music, it kind of reminds me a lot of 1914 as well. Sturmtrap is a particular favorite, not only because that one's a little bit easier for me to say, but I like the heavy syncopated breakdowns on there. And then you can kind of hear like the atmosphere swell around it. A lot of cool vocal dynamics too. Like, I believe there are a fair amount of like backup vocalists on here to help contribute to the, you know, like vocal trade-offs and gang vocals. It definitely gives the album like a bigger feel vocally, and vocally Noise, I think, has a great voice. Like, he just has this solid black metal scream. It's very powerful. It gives the songs a lot of additional weight, as if they really needed it, because a lot of these songs are just huge sounding. You get occasional more like folky melodies that show up kind of in the vein of like Kalma. And while a lot of this is just like blast beats and galloping drums, you get some more slower menacing tracks later, like Ritter der Luft. Maybe I got that right. Anyway, I really like the heavy syncopated chugs on there. The whole album just is huge sounding. And I'm sure if I understood German, I would probably be commenting on the lyrics too, because they really seem very vested in their theme. And I really like that. Like, bands with like interesting concepts in terms of like their overall sound, I like that. And World War I generally gets overshadowed by a lot of World War II stuff. I mean, World War I was supposed to be the war that ended all wars. I think we got a bit ahead of ourselves there, but there's definitely a lot of like, you know, stuff to talk about in that era, the trench warfare. I mean, we started using tanks and such, like, you know, there's a lot of firsts there, and it was grisly. It was possibly even more ugly than like any other war, because it was still very up close and personal, and just, I mean, well, war's shitty anyway, but there's something about that World War I aesthetic that just feels, I don't know, like darker. I will say that a lot of the songs kind of have a very similar vibe, so there is a bit of rinse and repeat on here, but they do repeat a lot of cool stuff. But I do like the closer on here as a more intimate, reflective, like, kind of ballad. Something Die Waffen Fammen. Again, I'm not good at German or any other language outside of English, and I'm not really that great at that either, but I kind of like that that is like a more intimate, reflective track at the end after all of the just absolute like gnarliness of all the blast beats and riffs that are on here. This is a pretty solid album. I definitely want to check out their first one as well. I even really like the artwork on here. Like, that's kind of a cool spin on, like, I mean, kind of like propaganda art that popped up around that time, or at least like, you know, political cartoons and such. If you're a big fan of Dissection and 1914, just kind of like merge those two bands together. There's also like a bit of stuff that's very similar to Kalma. I even got like some Children of Bodom vibes at certain points. Check this out. This is really solid, and yeah, I definitely want to hear more. And finally, we have Lifesick, loved by none, hated by all. This is the fourth album by this Danish death metal / metallic hardcore act. I heard a couple of tracks on YouTube, and I was like, dude, this is like right in my wheelhouse. Ferocious HM2 guitars, tons of D beats, lots of hardcore breakdowns. Baseline, if you love stuff like Nails and Terror in particular, you're probably gonna dig this. This thing is just vicious, front to back. Snarling riff after snarling riff. The vocals on here, honestly, dude, sounds a lot like Scott Vogel. The backup vocals occasionally give it like a little bit more of like a death metal feel in terms of the vocals, but for the most part, these are just those just hardcore shouted vocals that just pack a lot of fucking energy to them. Like, you know, every delivery sounds like he just wants to fight someone. And honestly, that's the aesthetic that I love in hardcore. I want every vocal delivery to sound like they're like verbally throwing punches at you. The songs are all explosive, lots of D beats. You know, occasionally you get moments of blast beats in there. It's not like a super blast heavy album, so like in terms of that comparison to Nails, it might not necessarily be there. But in terms of production, it's pretty damn close. Like, I actually had to check and see if it was Kurt Ballo that did the production, and it wasn't, but it's very similar. Like, the drums have this gigantic sound, like that snare sounds like someone's shooting a gun in the distance, and the guitars, pure HM2 snarl. Like, you can even hear a little bit of sizzle on there. Even the bass has that extra sizzle behind it too. Not a lot of like melody to really be found on here. Like Hollow Treats, I would say, is probably the only song where you get like some more melodic, albeit like kind of like doomy guitar harmonies. A lot of this is just gut punches, and very old school ones. Like, even the breakdowns, there's a lot of like single kick, old school hardcore breakdowns, like a lot of stuff you'd hear in like Sick of It All or Earth Crisis. And I really like the riff changes in here. Like, these guys can go from like those like Dismember style death metal tremolos to just like flat out down-picked hardcore meanness. And they're great about building into the breakdowns. Like, a lot of those classic tropes, like heavy floor tom hits, isolating a riff, just dropping out and letting the vocal shout something mean at you, and then boom, you're into just this absolute like disgusting chug-a-thon. And of course, whenever the vocals need an extra punch, bring in the gang vocals, and yeah, let's keep this pit spinning. Pretty straightforward release. Like, this is just meaner than shit, and yeah, it doesn't really pull a single punch. Again, very similar to Nails, Terror, again, like Fuming Mouth, like stuff like that. It's like kind of like HM2 driven hardcore / metallic hardcore sound with like a bit of death metal. I would say this is more hardcore than it is death metal, but it is like 100% heavier than shit throughout the entire album. If you're a big fan of any of the bands I mentioned there, strongly recommend checking this one out. I don't know if it's year-end material, but I know I really like it, and I definitely want to check out their other 3 albums now. So yeah, check them out. And that will do it for another collection update. I am almost done with what hopefully be the last one before I start getting down to the year-end stuff. Releases will be slowing up in December anyway, so I'll probably do a couple of like back-to-back collection updates or something like that, just to sort of, you know, show you what all I've listened to before I got down the list. I'm trying to be as thorough as possible. I at least want to get like all the stuff that I've listened to, you know, out on videos before I get down to those year-end lists, because man, this year has been absolutely loaded with stuff. Either way, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also now have memberships. They are only 99 cents, and our lone perk at this point are members only live stream, which we did one on Thanksgiving night. I'm sure that was a lot of fun. I'm recording this before we did it, but I don't know. I have a feeling it was probably fun. But yeah, we're going to try to do those once a month, maybe once every 2 months. Kind of depends on the schedule. Like, I don't know if we'll end up doing one in December just because holiday madness ensues there, but we might. We also have dumb emojis, which is not really a perk, but it's definitely a thing we have. And baseline, this is all pretty much a new way to help support the channel. We're trying to get away from Patreon. Again, StreamYard, raising their prices, yada, yada, yada. If you were interested in joining up, there is a join button down below. We also still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our t-shirts and hats too, and that is linked down below along with all the links to the music. We would appreciate that help if you choose to, but either way, we are appreciative of everything we have already. This has been an amazing run. We're getting close to 20,000 subscribers, which I will be putting together something for a giveaway here. Probably announcing that sometime around the new year. And yeah, you guys are just amazing. Like, flat out. You guys keep this channel going. I'm still blown away that, this channel has grown as much as it has. It really feels like it shouldn't have, but we appreciate it nonetheless. So one more big thank you, because you guys are amazing, and we will catch you later.